Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of the Walking Dedicated Men series, presented by One Faith, One People Ministries, and I'm Andrew Gabriel Roth. And this is a follow-up to a teaching that I did on Adam's calendar revelation, which is, as you can see, this is part 2 of that series. However, as we're about to explain here, and get into, it wasn't originally my intention to do a sequel to Adam's calendar, but it soon became apparent that that's exactly what I had to do. So at the end of part 1, which, by the way, if you haven't seen part 1 yet, I would encourage you, whether you're seeing this on YouTube or on my own website, One Faith, One People Ministries, or some other site, I would encourage you highly to watch part 1, because if not, I think that a lot of what I'm going to say in following up here is not necessarily going to make as good a sense as it would if you'd watched part 1. So that's my recommendation. So basically, though, let me explain why this is sort of unscheduled and it happened anyway. So at the end of the first part, I thought I could proceed straight to the next walking dedicated man, Enoch. However, as I thought more deeply into the grand scriptural themes that we were talking about in part 1, I realized there was more to tell. For one thing, some folks wanted to know if Adam would really have known the name of God, or Elohim, which is Yahweh. That's one of the cornerstone pieces of Adam's calendar mechanism, and if he doesn't know that name, then we might have a problem. So again, like I said here, it's an important consideration because, as I say here, without knowledge of the name of Father Yah, Adam cannot derive the instruction to count 26 weeks from one turn of the year, which we call equinox, to another. And in other cases, the scripture does appear to imply that nobody knew the name before Moses. So what's going on? What does the scripture say? And how might it have perhaps been misinterpreted? Let's take a look at this. First, we're going to be looking in Exodus 6, 2 through 3. That's the scripture that's brought up the most often to suggest that Moses was the first one to know the name of God. As we read here in the AESV version, God, Elohim, spoke to Moshe and said to him, I am Mar Yah, that is to say, Master Yah, and I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Yaakov as God Almighty, but by my name Mar Yah, I was not known to them. Now, to deal with this issue, for this particular question, there are two possible answers. When we go to Exodus 3, what we notice is that Father Yah actually gave two names. One was I am that I am, or Aa Asher Aa, and the other one is the shorter name, which is Yahweh. The difference between these two names is that I am that I am is obviously first person, whereas Yahweh is masculine third person. Aa Asher Aa, I am that I am, is what Father Yah has always called himself. Yahweh, Yah, he who is, would be the translation from Hebrew, rough translation, is what we would call him, because if we say I am that I am, then we are equating ourselves with the Almighty, and we're not supposed to do that. So the first solution here is that it is I am that I am, Aa Asher Aa, a name that never appeared prior to Exodus 3, that Father Yah is talking about in terms of that they didn't know me by that name, or they didn't understand the true significance of my name. That might be another way of looking at it. These Hebrew words, though, often translated as a statement, and this is what I think is actually the stronger possibility. Sometimes what we think is a statement is actually a question. And if it's a question, now the whole meaning of the words has changed. Like, it's a rhetorical question, as I say at the bottom here. As we see here, this very prominent, popular, and fairly accurate, I must say, translation, the scriptures, says, "And Elohim spoke to Moshe and said to him, I am Yahweh, and I appeared to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as El Shaddai." Now, what does that mean? Let me stop there. El Shaddai is another title, okay? I appeared to them under this title, right? But it says, "And by my name, Yahweh," instead of like, I was not known to them, it's a question. Was I not known to them? In other words, Father Yah is saying, isn't it clear I was already known to them? Was I not known to them? Since ancient Hebrew has no punctuation marks, and given the evidence, I think the scriptures folks actually got this one right. And that's what I believe, is that this was more meant to be a question rather than a statement. But there is another confirming witness to this idea, proving that Adam knew the name. Genesis 4 verse 26 says, "And to Sheth and to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enoch." This is Adam's grandson. "Then it was begun to call on the name of Yahweh." Genesis 4 verse 26. Again, the scriptures 1998. The timing of this verse is very important, because when we read the ages of the patriarchs in Genesis 5, Adam is 130 years old when he has Seth, and Seth is 105 when he had Enoch. So when Enoch is born, Adam is 235 years old, right? And he lives to be 930. So that means that when men began to call upon the name of Yahweh, Adam still had 695 years minimum to also know that name. And I would contend Adam knew the name from the beginning, because he walked with Yahweh, and he is called Yahweh in the text in Genesis 2. But moving on, the next most important fact about the name, this other aspect, is not just that this is my name, this is how it's spelled, and this is how it sounds, but what that name it represents. We are told in Exodus 3:15, "This is my memorial name for all generations." Not, "This will be my name." You see, if it was "will be my name," then you could say that the memorial was, from this moment on, you call me this. But because it is, "This is my name," it opens the door to what I believe is the truth, which is this has always been my name. And therefore the name has been unchanged, going all the way back to forever, right? So if the name was not changed, its spelling was the same, and therefore its pronunciation was the same. And here's another important thing. Since the spelling of the name never changed, in ancient Hebrew, also the letters are numbers. The numerical value of the name was 26, and so that has never changed, and therefore Adam would know that this is what the name adds up to. And as we saw also in part 1, this is why I believe Adam counted in units of 26 weeks twice a year for his basic calendar system. In the previous presentation also, moving on to another important topic, I also mentioned what I imagine could be a difficult concept for some folks. And it's this. While the moon was given a rulership role for the night in Genesis 1, so were the stars. It did not become a calendar tool until much later. Adam would have noticed that harvests do better when done at a full moon, for example. That's well-known ancient knowledge. But the moon, in Adam's time, did not regulate the season count. See, the terms that we get are the greater, gadol, and lesser, katan, light. The greater is the sun, and the lesser is the moon. It's about rank and dominion. Who gets to be in charge of what? So because the sun is the gadol, the greater light, it outranks the lesser light, the moon. Father Yah also knows, although Moshe or Adam probably would not know, that the sun is a star, right? So by ruling the day, the sun will regulate the time of year that the moon will then use to count to the feasts. But we don't get feast based on the moon until the Exodus. So, again, as I just said, the sun is a star, so since the sun outranks the moon, the stars also outrank the moon. Even though the stars are part of the lesser light that rules the night, they are still greater than the moon. And this can be a little counterintuitive because even though the moon is much smaller than the stars are so much further away, and the moon is so much closer that the moon dominates the night sky. So this raises, of course, another series of questions. How does the moon rule the night in relationship to the stars? And this was something I didn't quite specify in part 1. So let's get into this. You see, just as the sun has a yearly cycle and a daily cycle, so does the moon, and so do the stars. Both the stars and the moon will rise and set each night, although the moon will not be seen from Earth when it goes into what we call conjunction. This is the point every 29 and a half days where basically the Earth, sun, and the moon, they line up in a straight line, and the moon is bathed in the light of the sun. And when it is bathed in that light of the sun, it will not be seen from our position on Earth. However, as I say here, even though we don't see it, it still rises. And both the stars and moon cycle throughout the year. But the difference is, in the scripture, that the stars and constellations, which are called Mazaroth in the book of Job, the stars are given a leadership heralding position. Whereas the moon it has to follow the seasons, the stars bring the seasons in. Let me show you this. Do you bind the bands of Chema, which is the Pleiades, or loosen the cords of Kessel, which is Orion? Do you bring out the constellations, Mazaroth, right, in its season? So the constellations are attached to the seasons. Or do you lead the bear or the great bear with its sons? Do you know the laws of the heavens, and have you set their rule, or do you set their rule over the earth? Okay? So the stars are charged with telling us when the seasons are, or pulling the seasons forward. Now let's look at the moon's job. Psalm 104:19. He made the moon for the appointed times, right? The sun knows it's going down. So let's look at this. The word that's for appointed times, moedim, can mean that, or it can also mean seasons. Seasons and appointed times are very similar concepts. There's only a very fine nuance between these ideas. Say, for like Passover. Passover is something that must happen in spring, because bringing forth the first fruits of the barley is part of the 8-day Passover holiday. So, technically speaking, spring would be the season, right? Because that's the only time that you can get the barley. And Passover is the appointed time, the holiday, with which you do the barley harvest. But in other cases, the appointed times and seasons are synonyms, okay? They're referring to the same thing, but just a different emphasis on the same thing. So Passover is the appointed time for barley. Pentecost or Shavuot is the time that you bring the first fruits of the wheat. And Tabernacles is the time that you do, it's called the Feast of Ingathering. Why? Because you're gathering in your grape harvest. The point is, the stars, the Mazaroth, the constellations, lead out the seasons by proclaiming and regulating their arrival. Whereas the moon, as we saw in the Psalms, it doesn't lead out the seasons. It was made for the seasons, which says the moon is in the service of the seasons, not the lead. In other words, once the stars and sun proclaim the time of year, the moon's job is to count to either new moon or full moon feasts that are within that particular season. The other clue about how this hierarchy works is given in the line which you saw in the Psalms also a couple slides ago. The sun knows it's going down. Now, that seems a little odd. What does that mean? Well, in my opinion, what it means is the sun must approve the day's start or end. The Hebrew days always end at sunset, and the new day starts in darkness. Okay? So the sun, in effect, takes a bow and says, thank you, I'm now going out of the way. Okay? And the moon will then rise, and the moon will then begin to count. Right? The sun will set the time of year. The moon will set the days within the season. So it's sort of like saying, it's his park, I just play in it. That would be like the moon's position. The sun sets the playground, the moon plays. But the moon doesn't do anything unless the sun and the stars approve first. For example, on its own, the moon will become full at the expected time every month. Any full moon throughout the year is beautiful to look at. But only the sun and stars will determine if that same full moon is special, because it is hitting at an appointed time. The sun and the stars set the times of seeding and harvest. So if it isn't the harvest for barley or grapes, it's not an appointed time. It's not a great feast, a full moon great feast. But if it's a full moon and you're harvesting your barley, then congratulations. That full moon is Passover. And if it's grapes, congratulations. That full moon is Tabernacles, a great feast. Finally, though, I should point out that Adam himself probably has little knowledge of the stars. And the stars, in terms of specifying instructions, locations, and all of that, that will not really be dealt with until Job. So, like the moon, Adam might watch the stars at night. He's not going to count time, though, based on their patterns. And this is because those moon and star cycles are automatically taken care of by the 26-week counts based on the value of Yahweh's name times the 7-day week that we mentioned before. What's going to happen is this system, as it develops, while what Adam knows is perfectly fine and accurate and would still work better than anything we have now, there's going to be backups for backups for backups as each generation of walking dedicated men comes about and gets extra insights. So now let's get back to that and spend a little more time on the 26-week cycle count of Adam, because it is very important, and because I was giving much more of a brief overview with those charts with all those different pieces, 10, 12 pieces per chart. So now I want to sort of slow it back down and explain how this 26-week cycle count actually works. As we saw before, and I can't get into the details right now, Adam was created on Friday, September 24th, 3901 BCE. If you have any doubts about that, I would recommend you can write to me through onefaith1peopleministries.com, onefaithandrew, that's ONEFAITHANDREW @gmail.com, and tell me that you would like to see this PowerPoint study called Restoring the True Biblical Chronology, that goes into how we can know the exact day of Exodus and count backwards to the creation day of Adam. But that's a really long story, and it's a really long PowerPoint that gets into all of these things. But just so that you know, I've not come to this date just because it sounds cool. There is many years of documentation and research behind Adam's creation day. Friday, September 24th, 3901 BCE. But let's deal with Adam and realize that he is made fully adult. Adam doesn't go through childhood as we think of it, because Adam is not a baby that becomes a toddler, that becomes an adolescent. Adam is fully formed, okay? And I believe that part of the way that he is walking with Father Yah is that he basically had a lot of foreknowledge. On the very day of his life, I think Adam knew all that he needed to know to be a fully functioning adult. Father Yah designed him that way. So now here's where the modern technology comes in. With the aid of advanced calendar algorithms and these websites, Formulab and IMCCE, we can determine the exact moment of fall equinox in 3901 BCE, which was on a Tuesday, September 21st at 3:30 p.m. Jerusalem time. This is perfect for the calculations that Adam would need to do on the first day of his life. This is one of the main reasons why I'm doing this sequel, is because I know that I kind of danced around the issue of if Adam was doing his calendar the very day he was born, or if it was something that came about many years later. I believe Father Yah gave him all the knowledge he needed so that on the day he was created, if I said born, I shouldn't have said that. The day that Adam was created, he could do that calendar. Because the very year that Adam is created, at least in my chronology, is perfect for starting this calendar system off. Right? Abba Yahweh has chosen a year when the moment of fall equinox is on a Tuesday, and the first sunrise when the fall equinox would be perceived, and we talked about this in part 1, when you see the sunrise at 90 degrees, right? That's like the sunrise after an equinox, and that would have been on a Wednesday, which is the start of what we call a luminary count. This would have given Adam all the witnesses he needed to end this old year and start the new year. And that old year, the year that just ended, right before Adam was made, ended on the exact right day of the week for the calendar to work. So even though Adam was made on the 6th day, Friday, his preloaded advanced knowledge would have told him that the fall equinox had happened over the 2 previous days. And so on that first day of life, Adam knew the sun was rising at or greater than a 90-degree angle, and that fall had arrived, and it was time to do his count. Then by the rules that Father Yah gave him, and these rules, even though Adam had this understanding, I believe, from the moment of his consciousness, they were encoded in the Torah. And so we read them chronologically slightly later than what they were when they were actually known and implemented. Adam starts counting 7-day periods from the previous Wednesday, which would have been the sunrise after fall equinox, September 22nd, 3901 BCE. Again, if there's any need to go deeper on that, please review part 1 where we go through those steps. Adam first counts those 26 weeks from September 22nd, and this count will end on a Tuesday, on its particular Tuesday, March 22nd, the following year, 3900 BCE. That is a perfect end because his count will end the sunrise after vernal equinox. Could not be better timing. The next step then will be for Adam to begin that second 26-week count from Wednesday, March 22nd, again the year 3900 BCE. And this will bring him to Tuesday, September 20th, the end of the 52nd week. 52 weeks because he's counted 2 sets of 26 weeks. Once again, that next day, Wednesday, September 21st, sunrise after fall equinox, and this perfect cycle begins all over again. The bottom line is this system will always work with perfect precision because we are balancing the year by a fixed day of the week and to a fixed moment in astronomical time, which is to say the fall equinox. This system also allows for a series of cloudy days not to become a problem to throw off the count because there are multiple opportunities. What I mean by multiple opportunities is that Adam only needs to collect 2 witnesses out of a possible 5. And he gets these witnesses over a 3-day period to the sun either rising at or greater than 90 degrees or setting perfectly west at 270 degrees or further. Okay? So that on Wednesday morning, if the sun doesn't rise at the right angle, and that is a play on words because right as in correct and right as in 90 degrees, maybe it's cloudy, but if the sun sets at the exact right angle, which Adam could also see, that would prove to be a witness. Likewise, if the sun is at the right angle on Thursday morning, Thursday evening, or Friday morning, Adam only needs 2 witnesses over that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to prove the old year has died and the new year has begun. Every matter must be established by 2 witnesses. Deuteronomy 17:5 and 19 verse 15. And you would also have to certify by witnesses that the day has died, the week has died, and the month and the year have died. But if Adam does not have those 2 witnesses, he goes to the next Wednesday. That is, he counts from the following Wednesday and resumes his 26-week count from there. That's what we call adding a leap week. Although it's not, by that time it's 5 days. It's not a full week because you're at Friday when he makes that decision. Or to put it another way, Adam's counting system is comprised into these parts. 52 weeks of what we call the luminary count, starting on a Wednesday. Why? Because it was on the 4th day of the week that the sun, moon, and the stars, according to Genesis 1:14 through 19, were put in the heavens. And their purpose was to count time. And so you start on that Wednesday and you end 52 Tuesdays, which is day 364. 52 times 7 is 364 days. Now that next day, day 365, is what I call balancing day. That is the 53rd Wednesday from this first Wednesday, from when Adam started counting. Right? It's called balancing day also because the 4th day is the exact center of the 7-day count. Right? So it helps. You have to balance the year by both the luminary count and the what we call the Shabbat count. And balancing day is the earliest time that Adam would be able to see if the sun is rising in its correct position. If it does, that dawn is the first witness the new year has started. And he will have 2 other days to confirm that, and that will be fine. But if it doesn't, Adam will see if Wednesday sunset, Thursday sunrise, Thursday sunset, or Friday sunrise will give him 2 witnesses to the new year. If he has those witnesses, again, not meaning to be overly repetitive, but I know this is new stuff to a lot of people, so I'm repeating myself a little bit. He points to that previous Wednesday and calls it NYD, as you'll see me abbreviate, New Year's Day. Resumes the next 26-week count from there. But if less than 2 witnesses are found for that new year, it must be because the 364-day count, which is, basically our tropical year is 365 and 5 hours, 48 minutes, 45 seconds roughly. So you're going to have that overage of a couple of days. And if that 364-day count has strayed too far behind the solar year, you need to add that week to get the days back. So you advance to the next Wednesday and count from there. But the new info that is in this piece is once Adam has to add a leap week and start his 26-week count from the 54th Wednesday, which is because we added that leap week. I know, I don't mean to sound overly repetitive again, but I do want to be clear. You start on a Wednesday, you count to the 52nd Tuesday, right? When you add a leap week, you're now at the 54th Wednesday, from where last year's count began. You will observe that the next time you must add that leap week is exactly 5 years later, and this will always be true. Every 5th year, he will have to add a leap week. So if it's near, as we say here, if it's near NYD, which is to say New Year's Day, and it's cloudy all week, and Adam can't see any witness of sunrise and sunset, which would be exceedingly rare. But let's say it's a disaster of mega proportions, and it's cloudy all week. Adam will know by the math what to do. He will say, wait a second, I'm 3 years in from when I last had to add a leap week, and therefore I know that I'm not adding a leap week this year. I will in a couple of years. So I've gone into this extra bit of detail because I realized in part one, as I said before, it sounded like I wasn't sure when Adam's calendar actually began. And so when that happens, I immediately decided to do some checking, and I confirmed that from his very first year, the conditions were not just workable, they were perfect for Adam to inaugurate this system that always, always works. And this has been one of the joys of my calendar research, to be honest, just to give you a side note, that when I'm trying to figure out the historical year of an important event, like say the Exodus, and if I get it right, I get all sorts of confirming witnesses. In the year that I believe is the Exodus, 1447 BCE, Passover came right at vernal equinox and full moon. That was a beautiful concordance. It was the earliest possible time that Passover could have come. And again, when you do this calendar research, you realize these cycles will always begin at the ideal point in the cycle, right? So it makes sense that the very first Passover at Exodus would have that full moon hit at the earliest possible time in the cycle. The other fact that I wanted to mention, but didn't before, is how the angle of sunrise is related to each equinox. So while both equinoxes will have the sunrise at 90 degrees for one, maybe two mornings, the difference is that at fall equinox, the angle increases. So in the days after fall equinox, it'll go 90, 91, 92, right? 90, the degrees get larger. Whereas at vernal equinox, it decreases, going from 90 to 89, then 88, going towards summer. Since we are facing dawn due east, a decrease in rising angle means the sun's position is shifting north, because the sun will be rising increasingly north as it gets towards summer solstice, and the northernmost point will be about at 63 degrees. But an increase in the rising angle, the number gets bigger, means the sun's position is now shifting south towards the winter solstice, and the greatest amount of degrees would be about 117. Adam will be tracking this, and he will know where the sun is all year long. But I want to take an even additional step here, because I know this can be a little bit odd. If these numbers, as they did to me on first glance many years ago, 63 degrees for summer solstice and 117 degrees for winter solstice, sound a bit counterintuitive. In other words, why is the low number the sun is higher, right? Consider this. We view the sunrise from the flat 180 degree line that we call the horizon. The higher the number, the lower the angle, because the straight line is 180, right? And similarly, the lower the number, the higher the angle. Here's a picture. Picture's worth 1,000 words. So take a look at this. Here you have your horizon. So let me put that up. As you can see, that's 180 degrees. Look at the position of 30 degrees right here. This is a 30-degree angle, and this is a 60-degree angle. But 60 is in a lower position than 30. So a 117-degree angle, which is what it's going to be near winter solstice, it's going to be about right there, right? Roughly speaking. So very, very low. In the end, what Adam knows, though, represents a completely accurate system, which is in fact more reliable than our own modern Gregorian calendar. The 26-week cycles would also make sure the ancient biblical people would always hit the right week to either plant or harvest. So I know I showed some of this at the end of part one because I was intending to go to Enoch. I'm going to recap this again because Enoch will be part 3 now. and we'll just get into that momentarily. But what is particularly interesting is that a calendar that hits the right week turns out to be more useful than one that hits the right day. And you'd be thinking, that's weird. I mean, wouldn't it be best to hit the exact right day instead of the right week? Here's why. The reason is the whole point of a calendar is to know when to seed and when to harvest. And those activities would take place over several days. So it was more important to hit the best week to seed and harvest, which is to say, hit the week of an equinox than the day of an equinox. So for these ancient times, when we actually had to grow our own food directly, not rely on supermarkets, Adam's calendar achieves a balance through simple math and observation that would be ideal for millennia to come. It was. Okay? So, was this Enoch calendar, as some contend, amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls? Was it used by the Zadokites, who were the original priests descended from Aaron? The answers are coming in part 3. But let me give you a little bit of a preview for now. This is the circle of Enoch. And what Enoch does is he lives 365 years, 1 year for every whole day of the year. And that is one of the codes. And what we see is that Enoch has a sophisticated understanding based on the ages of his son and grandson when they each have a firstborn son. Methuselah lives to be 187 years, and he has Lamech, and it's 187 days between spring equinox and fall equinox. Enoch understands the seasons that are in Genesis 8 named directly: seed time, harvest, which are fall equinox, spring equinox, summer, and winter. When we look at that list in Genesis 8, by the way, they're given in the order that the year was tracking through. Seed time tells us that the fall equinox was the first seasonal event of the year. Right? And what happens is you count from fall to spring and from spring to fall. And then the next set would be summer and winter. And we'll get into that in great detail a little bit later. Minor adjustment here, it concerns Methuselah, right? Methuselah, again, 187 years old when he has Lamech, 187 days between spring and fall equinox. Methuselah's name means man of the dart. And here's a man throwing the dart, and as you can see, when you throw it like this, it makes an east-west arc, just like the sun. But Lamech, who is Enoch's grandson, he lives 182 years and then gives birth to Noah with his wife, of course. His name means strong youth. Compare that to the bridegroom in Psalm 19, verse 5. And 182 is 182 days between winter solstice and summer solstice. And again, the same other coordinates apply here. My point, though, is, when I say 187 days between equinoxes, 182 between solstices, it's what we call a mean average. But really, the numbers 187 and 182 are meant to be these averages that work over 7,000, 8,000 years, okay? That over 7,000 or 8,000 years, it will be between 182 and 187 days between two equinoxes, from spring to fall, and it will be between 182 and 187 days for winter solstice. And as the centuries go on, those numbers within that range, between 182 and 187, they're going to oscillate a little bit. But again, the goal is to hit the right week. And that's what the Enoch's calendar actually does. And we'll go into the details, as I said, a little later. But for now, thank you very much for your kind attention. If you like this teaching series, you might want to find out more about subscribing to OneFaithOnePeopleMinistries.com, where we do the weekly Torah, prophetic, and New Testament readings. We're a loving, supportive Hebrew Roots community of believers, and we welcome everybody. So you might want to find out more about that, but please Do not do any commerce of any kind on Shabbat, which is to say from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, or on a great feast. But thanks very much for listening, and we will be back with part 3 at some point on the calendar of Enoch. Take care, and shalom.